Most people know India as one of the world's most populous countries, a nation with rich spiritual traditions, and the birthplace of yoga. Today, India is a federal republic with over 1.5 billion people, an economic giant, rapidly developing in the 21st century. The country is the 7th largest in the world by area, stretching from the majestic Himalayas in the north to the tropical shores of the Indian Ocean in the south. The territory of modern India covers more than 3,200,000 square kilometers, over 1,200,000 square miles. Here flow the sacred Ganges and Indus rivers. Ancient temples and modern skyscrapers rise. Prayers are said in Sanskrit, and computer programs are written in English. This is a land where representatives of all world religions, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, and Jains, coexist peacefully. But what lies behind this modern appearance? What forces shaped this remarkable civilization over the millennia? Few know that the territory of modern India was home to some of humanity's most ancient urban settlements, flourishing as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. This land witnessed the rise and fall of the greatest empires, witnessed the birth of world religions, and endured brutal conquests and heroic struggles for independence. An interesting fact: at a time when most of Europe was covered in forests and inhabited by scattered tribes, cities with sewer systems, running water, and multi-story buildings already existed in the Indus River Valley. These ancient settlements surpassed many European cities in their level of development, even during the Middle Ages. The cities of the Harappan civilization had straight streets, public baths, water supply systems, and even standardized bricks. All this 2,000 years before the rise of the Roman Empire. This is the history of India. The dawn of civilization, the Harappan culture. The history of India began long before the advent of writing, in the mists of time, when humanity was just learning to work metals and build its first cities. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, one of the greatest civilizations of antiquity flourished in the Indus River Valley, the Harappan, or Indus Valley civilization. This astonishing culture spanned over 1 million square kilometers, larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Its cities stretched from modern-day Afghanistan to western India, from the foothills of the Himalayas to the shores of the Arabian Sea. The centers of this civilization were the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, whose ruins still amaze archaeologists with their perfection. Mohenjo-Daro, meaning Hill of the Dead, was a true marvel of ancient urban planning. The city was planned with mathematical precision. Wide, straight streets intersected at right angles, creating a regular grid of blocks. Houses were built of fired bricks of standard sizes, indicating a high level of industrial organization. Each house had a bathroom, and wastewater was drained through a system of covered sewers. Particularly striking is the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, a structure measuring 12 by 7 meters and 2.5 meters deep. The walls of the pool were lined with brick and coated with bitumen for waterproofing. Surrounding the bath were rooms, possibly intended for religious rituals or public gatherings. The inhabitants of the Harappan civilization were skilled artisans. They knew how to work bronze and copper, crafted jewelry from gold and silver, and created elegant soapstone seals with images of animals and mysterious scripts that scholars still cannot decipher. Harappan artisans were the first in the world to cultivate cotton and weave fabrics from it. Trade was the foundation of the Harappan civilization's prosperity. Archaeologists have discovered Harappan seals and artifacts in Mesopotamia, demonstrating trade links spanning more than 2,000 kilometers. Harappan merchants carried cotton fabrics, ivory, and precious stones to distant lands, and in exchange received metals unavailable in the Indus Valley. But what happened to this great civilization? Around 1700 BCE, the Harappan culture suddenly disappeared. The cities were abandoned, trade ceased, and writing was forgotten. Scholars have put forward various hypotheses: climate change, floods, invasions, epidemics. Perhaps a combination of factors was the cause. The great Indus Valley civilization left behind many mysteries, but its legacy, urban planning, crafts, and trading traditions, influenced the subsequent development of Indian culture. The Vedic period, the foundations of Indian spirituality. The enigmatic Harappan civilization was followed by the Vedic period, an era that laid the foundations of what we today call Indian culture. In the second millennium BCE, tribes calling themselves Aryans, noble, began to penetrate the Indus and Ganges valleys from the northwest, through the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush. These tribes were radically different from the sedentary inhabitants of the Harappan cities. The Aryans were nomadic pastoralists, unfamiliar with urban life, but possessed excellent bronze and iron weapons, domesticated horses, and invented war chariots. Their society was warlike and patriarchal, worshipping the gods of thunder and war, and celebrating the exploits of heroes in epic hymns. The most important heritage of the Aryans was their spiritual tradition, the Vedas, sacred hymns passed down from generation to generation orally, without being written down. The Vedas were considered Shruti, heard, meaning divine revelation, received directly by the ancient sages, the rishis, from the gods. The four Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Samaveda, the Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda, became the foundation of the entire Indian religious and philosophical tradition. The Rig Veda, the oldest of the Vedas, contains over 1,000 hymns dedicated to various deities. Here we find images of Indra, the warrior god and lord of lightning and rain, Agni, the god of fire, Varuna, the keeper of cosmic order, and Surya, the solar deity. These hymns are full of poetic power and philosophical depth. They express wonder at the mysteries of the universe, the search for truth, and the desire to understand man's place in the universe. Gradually, Aryan tribes spread throughout northern India, intermingling with the local population. This process was not peaceful. The Vedas are replete with references to battles with the Dasyus, dark-skinned tribes who lived in fortified settlements. However, over time, conquerors and conquered merged into a single culture, although the memory of the ancient division persisted in the caste system. Vedic society was divided into 4 varnas, or castes. The Brahmins were priests and guardians of sacred knowledge. The Kshatriyas were warriors and rulers. The Vaishyas were farmers, herders, and traders. And the Shudras were servants and artisans. This system, initially based on a professional division of labor, eventually became hereditary and developed into a rigid caste hierarchy. In the late Vedic period, in the first millennium BCE, the Aryans advanced further east into the fertile Ganges Valley. Here they mastered agriculture, learned to smelt iron, and founded the first cities. Society became increasingly complex, and the first states, the Janapadas, arose. Religious life also became more complex, with the appearance of the Brahmanas, texts explaining rituals, and then the Upanishads, philosophical treatises that first formulated the fundamental ideas of Indian philosophy. It is in the Upanishads that we find the teachings of Brahman, the absolute reality underlying all existence, of Atman, the individual soul identical to Brahman, of samsara, the cycle of birth and death, and of karma, the law of retribution. according to which a person's actions determine their destiny. These ideas would become the foundation not only of Hinduism, but also of other religions born on Indian soil. By the end of the Vedic period, the foundations of the worldview that would shape the entire subsequent development of Indian civilization had been established. It was a culture that saw the universe as a single whole, where everything is interconnected, where the spiritual is more important than the material, where the highest human goal is not power or wealth, but liberation from the shackles of samsara, the attainment of moksha, union with the Absolute. The Mahajanapadas, the birth of great religions. By the 6th century BCE, the Ganges Valley had become a flourishing land of cities and kingdoms. The Iron Age brought revolutionary changes. Iron tools made it possible to clear dense forests. Iron weapons changed the nature of warfare, and iron coins simplified trade. 16 great states, the Mahajanapadas, emerged. Among them the powerful Magadha in the east, the wealthy Kosala in the center, and the prosperous Vrija and Malla states in the north. It was an era of great change, not only in politics and economics, but also in spiritual life. The old Vedic religion, with its complex rituals and the dominance of the Brahmins, no longer satisfied the needs of the urban population. New teachers emerged, who preached different paths to salvation, more accessible and understandable to the common man. Among these teachers, two figures stood out, whose influence on world history is difficult to overestimate. Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, and Vardhamana Mahavira, the founder of Jainism. Both were princes, both renounced wealth and power in pursuit of truth, and both created religious systems that still exist today. Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BCE into a royal family of the Shakya tribe at the foot of the Himalayas. According to tradition, at his birth, sages predicted that he would become either a great king or a great hermit. His father wanted his son to become a ruler and surrounded him with luxury, hiding all signs of suffering from him. But at 29, the prince left the palace and witnessed old age, illness, and death for the first time. These 4 encounters shook him and forced him to reflect on the meaning of life. Siddhartha abandoned his family, wealth, and royal title to find a way to escape his suffering. For 6 years he devoted himself to severe asceticism, but realized that extremes do not lead to truth. He then chose the middle way, between luxury and asceticism, between indulging his passions and suppressing them. Meditating beneath the Bodhi tree, he attained enlightenment and became the Buddha, awakened one. He understood the 4 noble truths. Life is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. Desire can be ended, and there is a path to the cessation of desire, the Eightfold Path. For 45 years, Buddha preached his teachings throughout the towns and villages of the Ganges Valley. He taught in the vernacular, not Sanskrit, and welcomed people of all castes, including women, into his community. His teaching that everyone can achieve liberation through their own efforts, without the help of gods or priests, revolutionized religious consciousness. Buddhism quickly spread throughout India and beyond. It brought hope to the oppressed, solace to the suffering, and purpose to those seeking life. Buddhist monks founded the first universities, hospitals, and orphanages. They developed philosophy, art, and science. For many centuries, Buddhism became one of the leading forces of Indian civilization. No less important was the role of Jainism, founded by Mahavira. This teaching preached ahimsa, absolute non-harm to any living being. Jains not only abstained from meat, but also avoided any actions that could harm even the smallest creatures. They covered their mouths with cloth to avoid inhaling small insects, and carefully cleaned their surroundings before sitting. Although Jainism did not spread as widely as Buddhism, its influence on Indian culture was enormous. The idea of ahimsa, adopted by Hinduism, became one of the foundations of the Indian worldview. It influenced diet, attitudes toward nature, and even political philosophy. It's no wonder that Mahatma Gandhi, who formulated the principles of nonviolent resistance, grew up in a Jain community. The Mauryan Empire, the first unification. The political fragmentation of the Mahajanapada era ended in the 4th century BCE, when a young prince named Chandragupta Maurya managed to unite most of India under his rule. This occurred during a time of great upheaval, when the armies of Alexander the Great arrived from the west and traditional dynasties were losing their power. Alexander crossed the Indus in 326 BCE and defeated King Porus, but his army, exhausted by years of campaigning, refused to advance further into India. The Macedonian king was forced to turn back, leaving his governors in the conquered territories. However, his departure created a power vacuum, which Chandragupta exploited. Supported by his wise advisor Chanakya, author of the famous treatise on statecraft, the Arthashastra, Chandragupta began by capturing Magadha, the most powerful of the Indian kingdoms. He then expelled the Macedonian governors, and by 320 BCE had created an empire stretching from Afghanistan to the Bay of Bengal. Chandragupta proved to be not only a talented military leader, but also a wise ruler. He created an effective administrative system based on the principles laid out in the Arthashastra. The empire was divided into provinces, governed by the king's viceroys. An extensive network of spies monitored the mood of the population. A standing army was created, consisting of infantry, cavalry, war elephants, and chariots. The empire's capital, Pataliputra, modern-day Patna, amazed foreign ambassadors with its splendor. The Greek ambassador, Megasthenes, left a description of Chandragupta's palace, which surpassed the residences of the Persian kings in luxury. The city was home to approximately 500,000 people. At the time, it was one of the largest cities in the world. Chandragupta's son, Bindusara, expanded the empire southward, conquering most of the Deccan. But the Mauryan Empire reached its true heights under the founder's grandson, Ashoka, who reigned from 273 to 232 BCE. It was Ashoka who transformed India into the greatest power of the ancient world, and accomplished one of the most astonishing transformations in human history. Young Ashoka was a typical ancient despot, cruel, ambitious, and merciless toward his enemies. He conquered the last independent state in the east, Kalinga, modern-day Orissa. But this victory came at a tremendous cost. According to Ashoka himself, 100,000 people died in the war, and 1.5 million were taken into slavery. The scale of the massacre shocked the emperor. He realized that power based on violence could bring happiness to neither the ruler nor the subjects. Ashoka converted to Buddhism and completely changed the principles of statecraft. Instead of Digvijaya, conquest by the sword, he proclaimed Dhammavijaya, conquest by righteousness. Ashoka became the first ruler in history to officially renounce war as a political tool. He banned animal sacrifices, restricted hunting, and instituted days when even the killing of fish was prohibited. Hospitals were built throughout the empire, not only for people, but also for animals. Gardens were created, wells dug, roads and inns were built. But Ashoka's most important legacy is his edicts, carved on rocks and pillars throughout the empire. These inscriptions, written in local languages, proclaimed the principles of righteous rule, religious tolerance, care for subjects, non-violence, and a pursuit of truth. Ashoka was the first ruler to address the people directly, explaining his policies and calling for virtue. "All men are my children," wrote Ashoka. "Just as I wish for my children all happiness and prosperity in this world and the next, so I wish for all men." These words, carved in stone over 2,000 years ago, sound remarkably modern. Ashoka's empire stretched from the Himalayas to Mysore, from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. Only the southernmost part of India, Tamil Nadu, remained independent. It was the largest state of antiquity, uniting tens of millions of people of different tribes, castes, and religions under the rule of a single ruler. Ashoka didn't limit himself to domestic reforms. He sent Buddhist missionaries to neighboring countries, Ceylon, Burma, and the Hellenistic kingdoms. Thanks to this, Buddhism transformed from an Indian religion into a global one. Ashoka's daughter, Sanghamitra, brought Buddhism to Ceylon, where it survives to this day. The Golden Age of the Guptas. After the fall of the Mauryans, India plunged into political fragmentation for nearly 5 centuries. The northwestern regions were subjected to constant invasions from Central Asia, first by the Indo-Greek kings, the successors of Alexander the Great, then by the Scythian tribes of the Shakas, Parthians, and Kushans. These conquerors brought Hellenistic culture, which mingled intricately with Indian culture, creating the astonishing synthesis of Gandhara art. In the first centuries of the Common Era, the Kushan Empire controlled the Silk Road, linking China with the Mediterranean. India became a crucial crossroads of global trade. The Kushan kings, especially Kanishka, patronized Buddhism. Under their rule, the Fourth Buddhist Council was convened, which systematized the Buddha's teachings. However, political unity was only restored in the 4th century CE, when a small principality in Magadha was led by an energetic ruler named Chandragupta I. He founded the Gupta dynasty, which unified northern India for 2.5 centuries and created what historians call the Golden Age of Indian civilization. Chandragupta's son, Samudragupta, was a great conqueror, compared to a god of war by court poets. He led victorious campaigns from Punjab to Assam, from the Himalayas to the Narmada River. However, unlike later conquerors, Samudragupta did not seek direct control over all the conquered territory. Many southern kings retained their power by recognizing Gupta supremacy and agreeing to pay tribute. The Gupta Empire reached its true height under Chandragupta II, known as Vikramaditya, son of valor, who reigned from 375 to 415. Under his rule, the empire's borders stretched from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal, from the Himalayas to the Narmada River. It was an era of peace, prosperity, and unprecedented cultural flourishing. It was during the Gupta era that Indian culture achieved its classical forms, which influenced all of Asia. This was the time of the creation of the great epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana in their final form, and the flowering of Sanskrit poetry and drama. Kalidasa, known as the Indian Shakespeare, created his immortal works, the dramas Shakuntala and Vikramorvashi, and the poems Meghaduta and Raghuvansha. But the golden age of the Guptas was not only a time of flourishing literature and art. It was then that Indian scholars made discoveries that changed the face of the world. Mathematicians invented the positional decimal number system using 0. Without this invention, modern mathematics and science would be impossible. The astronomer, Aryabhata, calculated the length of the year to within a few minutes explained the causes of solar and lunar eclipses, and proposed the Earth's rotation on its axis. The physician Sushruta compiled a medical treatise describing over 300 operations, including cataract removal, kidney and bladder stones, and plastic surgery. Indian surgeons performed skull surgeries, sewed intestines, and were able to stop bleeding. European medicine only reached this level in the 19th century. Founded in the 5th century, Nalanda University became the world's largest center of learning. More than 10,000 students from all over Asia studied there. Nalanda's vast library contained hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on all fields of knowledge. Instruction was conducted not only in Sanskrit, but also in local languages. Students studied not only religious subjects, but also secular sciences, such as medicine, astronomy, mathematics, logic, and grammar. The arrival of Islam, a new chapter in history. The 7th century brought a new religion to the world, Islam. The Prophet Muhammad's preaching in Arabia led to the establishment of a vast caliphate, which within a century had spread from Spain to Central Asia. Arab conquerors reached the borders of India as early as the early 8th century. In 709 CE, the 17-year-old Arab commander, Muhammad ibn Qasim, crossed the Indus and conquered Sindh, the western region of India. This was the first Muslim conquest on Indian soil. Ibn Qasim proved himself not only a talented military leader, but also a wise administrator. He did not force the local population to convert to Islam, preserved Hindu temples, and allowed Brahmins and Buddhist monks to perform their religious duties. However, the conquest of Sindh proved to be an isolated incident. The Arabs were unable to advance further into India, encountering stubborn resistance from local rulers. For nearly 3 centuries, Sindh remained the only Muslim region on the subcontinent, a kind of Islamic outpost on the eastern border of the Caliphate. The massive Islamic invasion of India began only in the 11th century, when Turkic conquerors arrived from Afghanistan. The first of these was Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, who led 17 raiding expeditions into northern India between 1001 and 1027. Mahmud did not seek permanent conquest. His goal was booty. His troops destroyed Hindu temples, seized treasures, and carried off thousands of slaves, but then returned to Afghanistan. The destruction of the Somnath temple in Gujarat, one of the holiest sites in Hinduism, was particularly notorious. This temple was not only a religious center, but also a major bank where the donations of believers were deposited. Mahmud destroyed the sanctuary, carried off enormous wealth, and ordered the main idol to be smashed on the steps of a mosque in Ghazni. After Mahmud, there was a pause of almost a century and a half. Indian rulers strengthened their defenses and formed powerful coalitions. Prithviraj Chauhan, the Raja of Delhi and Ajmer, resisted especially stubbornly, uniting many northern Indian princes under his rule. However, in 1192, he was defeated at the Battle of Tarain by Muhammad Ghori, and the road to Delhi was open. In 1206, the Delhi Sultanate was founded, the first Muslim state in India, which lasted for over 300 years. Unlike Mahmud of Ghazni, the Delhi sultans did not limit themselves to plunder, but sought permanent control over the conquered territories. They established an administrative system, built cities, and carried out land reforms. The Delhi Sultanate survived several dynasties: the Mamluks, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Sayyids, and Lodis. Each made its own contribution to the history of Muslim India. Alauddin Khilji repelled the Mongol invasions and conquered most of the Deccan. Muhammad bin Tughlaq moved the capital south to Devagiri, attempting to create a pan-Indian empire. Firoz Shah Tughlaq built hundreds of mosques, madrasas, hospitals, and caravanserais, but the Delhi sultans were never able to create a stable state. Their power rested primarily on the military might of a small group of Turkic and Afghan Muslim warriors. The overwhelming majority of the population remained Hindu and viewed the conquerors with distrust or hostility. Many regions retained de facto independence, recognizing Delhi's authority only nominally. Relations with southern India were particularly complex. Powerful Hindu states emerged there, the Vijayanagar Empire in the Deccan, and the Pandya, Chola, and Chera kingdoms in Tamil Nadu. These states not only successfully repelled Muslim invasions, but also went on the offensive themselves, liberating captured territories. The Mughal Empire, the pinnacle of power. In 1526, Zahir al-Din Muhammad Babur, a descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, crossed the Indus River at the head of a small but well-armed army. Babur had lost his ancestral possessions in Central Asia and was seeking new lands to conquer. India, with its wealth and fragmentation, seemed a tempting prize. At the Battle of Panipat, on April 21, 1526, Babur's army, numbering only 12,000, routed the 100,000-strong army of Ibrahim Lodi, the last Sultan of Delhi. Cannons and rifles, which Babur used for the first time in a major battle on Indian soil, played a decisive role. Ibrahim died in battle, and Babur became the ruler of Delhi and the founder of the Mughal dynasty. However, the conquest was only just beginning. The Hindu Rajas of Rajputana united under Rana Sanga and rose up against the invaders. At the Battle of Kanwa in 1527, Babur again achieved victory, but it was not an easy one. He himself wrote in his memoirs, "The Hindus fought like lions, and every one of their warriors was worth 10 of ours." Babur ruled India for only 4 years and died in 1530, bequeathing the throne to his eldest son, Humayun. The new Padishah proved an unsuccessful ruler. He lost almost all of his father's conquests, was expelled from India by the Afghan leader Sher Shah Suri, and spent 15 years in exile at the court of the Shah of Persia. It wasn't until 1555 that Humayun managed to regain his throne, but he died a year later, falling down the stairs in his library. Power passed to his 13-year-old son, Akbar, who was destined to become the greatest of the Great Mughals, and one of the most outstanding rulers in human history. Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar reigned for 49 years, from 1556 to 1605. During this time, he transformed the small principality inherited from his father into the most powerful empire in the world, uniting under his rule almost all of India, from Kashmir to the Deccan, from Bengal to Gujarat. Akbar was not only a great conqueror, but also a brilliant statesman. He understood that it was impossible to govern a vast country relying solely on a small group of Muslim nobles. Therefore, he pursued a policy of reconciliation with the Hindu majority, involving the Rajas in the governance of the empire. The symbol of this policy was Akbar's marriage to Princess Jodhabai from a noble Rajput family. This marriage, concluded for political reasons, eventually blossomed into a happy union. Jodhabai retained her religion. A Hindu temple was built in her chambers, and their son, the future Emperor Jahangir, was raised in a spirit of tolerance for both religions. Akbar abolished the jizya, a poll tax on non-Muslims that had existed since the time of the first caliphs. He banned forced conversions to Islam, permitted the construction of new Hindu temples, and restored destroyed shrines. Hindus gained access to the highest government positions. The famous Rajput military commander, Man Singh, became one of the emperor's closest associates. But Akbar went even further. In 1582, he proclaimed a new religion, Din-e-Ilahi, divine faith, which was intended to unite the best elements of all religions. This syncretic system incorporated elements of Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Jainism. Akbar regularly held religious debates in the Ibadat Khana, house of prayer, inviting representatives of all faiths. The administrative system created by Akbar was striking in its efficiency. The empire was divided into 15 provinces, each governed by a governor, a subadar. A uniform taxation system was introduced, based on precise land surveys and assessments of fertility. The renowned finance minister, Todar Mal, conducted a detailed land census of the entire empire. Under Akbar, Mughal culture flourished, a remarkable synthesis of Persian sophistication, Indian spirituality, and Turkic energy. Court artists created miniatures, striking in their delicacy of design and richness of color. Poets wrote verses in Persian, Arabic, and Turkic, as well as Hindi and other Indian languages. Music, a blend of Eastern and Indian traditions, was played at court. After Emperor Akbar's death on October 27, 1605, at Fatehpur Sikri, at the age of 63, his son Salim inherited the throne and took the name Jahangir, world conqueror. The new emperor continued his father's policies, though he lacked his genius. Under Jahangir, the empire reached its greatest extent, encompassing almost the entire Deccan. Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan, reigned during the height of Mughal art. It was he who built the Taj Mahal, a mausoleum for his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died giving birth to their 14th child. This monument to love took 22 years to build, with the finest craftsmen from India, Persia, Turkey, and Europe contributing to its creation. The white marble, inlaid with precious stones, creates a sense of weightlessness, as if the mausoleum were floating above the ground. The Taj Mahal became the pinnacle of Mughal architecture and one of the wonders of the world. But it also became a symbol of the empire's decline. The colossal sums spent on its construction depleted the treasury. Shah Jahan attempted to conquer Central Asia, the ancestral lands of his ancestors. But these campaigns ended in failure and further weakened the state. 3. And European penetration. Aurangzeb, who ruled for nearly half a century, 1658 to 1707, was the complete opposite of his predecessors. While Akbar sought religious reconciliation, Aurangzeb was a fanatical Muslim who dreamed of converting all of India to Islam. He reinstated the jizya, banned the construction of new Hindu temples, and destroyed many ancient shrines, including the famous temples in Varanasi and Mathura. This policy had disastrous consequences. The Rajput princes, who had loyally served Akbar and his successors, rebelled against Aurangzeb. In the west, the Marathas rose up under Shivaji, who established an independent Hindu state and was proclaimed Chhatrapati, emperor. In the north, the Sikhs rebelled, transforming their religious community into a military organization. Shivaji became a true folk hero. This son of a minor jagadar, landowner, managed to unite the Maratha tribes and create a powerful military machine. The Marathas employed guerrilla warfare tactics, surprise raids, ambushes in the mountains, and raids behind enemy lines. They captured Mughal forts, plundered caravans, and collected tribute from merchants. Aurangzeb spent the last 25 years of his life fighting in the Deccan, attempting to suppress the Maratha rebellion. A massive army, constant campaigns, and sieges of fortresses depleted the empire's treasury. The emperor himself died in a military camp, having failed to break the resistance. After Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire began to rapidly disintegrate. His successors were weak rulers, incapable of controlling the vast country. Provincial governors declared themselves independent rulers. The Marathas captured most of western and central India. The Sikhs established their own state in Punjab. Autonomous principalities emerged in Bengal, Oudh, and Hyderabad, only nominally recognizing Delhi's authority. While the Mughals were battling rebellious Marathas and Sikhs, new players appeared off the coast of India, European trading companies. The Portuguese were the first to establish a sea route to India in 1498, when Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope and reached Calicut on the Malabar coast. The Portuguese quickly realized the riches awaiting them. Indian spices, pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, and cloves were worth their weight in gold in Europe. Silk, cotton fabrics, precious stones, and ivory found ready buyers in European ports. Portugal enjoyed a century-long monopoly on trade with the East. However, the Portuguese monopoly was short-lived. In the 17th century, the Dutch arrived in the Indian Ocean, establishing the powerful Dutch East India Company. The Dutch outsold the Portuguese in organization, finance, and military affairs. They captured Ceylon, Indonesia, and the Malabar spice ports. But it was the English who became the ultimate winners in the struggle for India. The English East India Company, established in 1600, initially played a modest role compared to the Portuguese and Dutch. However, the English possessed important advantages: a strong navy, better organization, and most importantly, the support of a unified state that was rapidly becoming the world's leading maritime power. The English conquest. The turning point came in 1757, during the Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive, with just 3,000 soldiers, mostly Indian sepoys, defeated the 60,000-strong army of Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Bengal. This victory was achieved not so much by military superiority as by treachery. Clive bribed the Nawab's commanders, who withdrew their troops from battle at the crucial moment. The victory at Plassey gave the English control over Bengal, the richest province of the Mughal Empire. With a population of 40 million people and enormous revenues, Bengal became the foundation of English rule in India. The company's officials enriched themselves fabulously, while local artisans and peasants were mercilessly exploited. The first Governor-General, Warren Hastings, systematized the plunder of Bengal. The company set monopoly prices for goods, forcing artisans to sell their products below cost. Weavers were often tied to looms and had their thumbs cut off if they tried to work for competitors. Traditional industries collapsed, and millions of people lost their livelihoods. But the most terrible consequence of English rule was the Great Bengal Famine of 1770, which began in 1769 and continued until 1773. Despite the crop failure, the company continued to export grain to Europe, leaving the local population without food. As a result, 10 million people died, a third of Bengal's entire population. At the same time, the company's warehouses were full of grain, but it was more profitable to export it than to feed the starving Indians. The company's rapacious policies sparked fierce resistance. Between 1767 and 1799, Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan of Mysore fought 4 wars against the English. Tipu, known as the Tiger of Mysore, was one of the few Indian rulers to understand the threat posed by European colonialism. He modernized his army, acquired artillery and muskets, and even sought help from revolutionary France. Tipu Sultan was not just a military commander, but also an enlightened ruler. He promoted trade and industry, built roads and irrigation systems, and patronized arts and sciences. His capital, Srirangapatna, was renowned for its gardens, palaces, and libraries. But in 1799, the English stormed the city after a brutal siege. Tipu died defending his capital, sword in hand, choosing death over surrender. His famous last words were, "Better to live one day as a tiger than 1,000 years as a sheep." The Marathas also offered stubborn resistance. Their empire, which in the mid-18th century controlled most of India from the Deccan to Delhi, was ruled by the Peshwas from Pune. The Marathas were excellent horsemen and employed guerrilla tactics effectively. However, internal strife weakened their confederation, and between 1775 and 1818, the English fought 3 Anglo-Maratha wars, gradually dismantling their power. Lord Wellesley, who served as Governor-General from 1798 to 1805, pursued an aggressive policy of expansion. He introduced the subsidiary alliance system, under which Indian rulers maintained formal independence, but were forced to accept English residents and maintain English troops at their own expense. This system allowed the company to control local rulers without the costs of direct administration. The final stage of conquest came under Lord Dalhousie, who served from 1848 to 1856. He introduced the doctrine of lapse, according to which any princely state without a male heir would be annexed by the company. Using this pretext, he annexed Satara, Sambalpur, Jhansi, Nagpur, and other states. In 1856, he annexed Oudh, one of the last major independent kingdoms, claiming misgovernment. These annexations created widespread resentment among the Indian nobility, who saw their traditional way of life threatened. The company's cultural policies also aroused suspicion. Christian missionaries, supported by the government, actively sought to convert Indians. English education was promoted at the expense of traditional learning. Many Indians believed the British intended to destroy their religion and culture. The Great Rebellion of 1857. The accumulated grievances exploded in 1857 in what the British called the Indian Mutiny, but which Indians remember as the First War of Independence. The immediate cause was the introduction of new rifle cartridges allegedly greased with cow and pig fat, which violated Hindu and Muslim religious sensibilities. The rebellion began on May 10, 1857, when sepoys at Meerut refused to use the cartridges and were court-martialed. Their comrades freed them and marched to Delhi, where they proclaimed the aged Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, as Emperor of Hindustan. The rebellion spread rapidly across northern India. In Kanpur, Nana Sahib, the adopted son of the deposed Peshwa, led the revolt. After a 3-week siege, the English garrison surrendered, on the promise of safe passage, but the sepoys massacred them at the Sati Chora Ghat. This incident, along with the massacre of English women and children, inflamed British public opinion and led to savage reprisals. The most heroic figure of the rebellion was Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. When her husband died without a male heir, Dalhousie annexed Jhansi under the doctrine of lapse. The 22-year-old queen refused to surrender her son's inheritance and led the defense of Jhansi. After a fierce siege, she escaped with her infant son strapped to her back and died fighting at Gwalior, sword in hand. In Lucknow, Begum Hazrat Mahal, wife of the deposed king of Oudh, organized resistance against the British. She issued proclamations calling for Hindu-Muslim unity against the foreign invaders. Her court became a center of the rebellion, attracting fighters from across northern India. The rebellion also produced remarkable examples of Hindu-Muslim cooperation. Ashfaqullah Khan and Ram Prasad Bismil became symbols of communal harmony in the struggle against colonialism. Hindu and Muslim sepoys fought side by side, sharing the same chapatis, unleavened bread, as a sign of brotherhood. However, the rebellion lacked unified leadership and modern weapons. The rebels were armed mostly with swords and muskets, while the British had artillery and rifles. Moreover, large parts of India, including Bengal, Bombay, and Madras presidencies, remained loyal to the British. The Sikh regiments, recently defeated in the Punjab Wars, supported the British, hoping to regain their lost territories. The British response was savage. General Neil massacred civilians in Allahabad. In Delhi, after recapturing the city, the British executed hundreds of people daily. Entire villages suspected of supporting the rebels were burned down. The aged emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar was exiled to Rangoon, where he died in 1862. The rebellion officially ended in 1858, but guerrilla fighting continued for months. Tatya Tope, one of the most able rebel commanders, continued resistance until his capture and execution in 1859. The British estimated that over 100,000 Indians died in the fighting and subsequent reprisals. Crown rule and economic exploitation. The rebellion forced fundamental changes in British policy. In 1858, the Government of India Act transferred power from the East India Company to the British Crown. Queen Victoria became Empress of India, and a viceroy represented her in India. The British promised religious neutrality and respect for Indian customs, but these were largely empty words. The new administration systematized exploitation. India was transformed from a manufacturing center into a supplier of raw materials for British industry. Traditional textile production, which had once supplied the world, was destroyed to create markets for Manchester cotton. Millions of weavers lost their livelihoods and were forced into agriculture, creating rural overpopulation. The railroad system, often cited as a British contribution, was primarily designed to extract raw materials and transport troops. The lines connected ports with producing regions, but did little to integrate the Indian market. Indians paid for construction through taxes, but British companies owned the railways, and guaranteed profits were paid to British shareholders. The salt tax was particularly oppressive. Salt, essential for life in a tropical climate, was heavily taxed, and Indians were forbidden from making their own salt. This monopoly generated enormous revenues for the government, while imposing hardship on the poorest sections of society. Land revenue policies devastated agriculture. The permanent settlement in Bengal created a class of landlords who had no connection to the soil, but collected rents from peasants. The Rayatwari system in South India and the Mahalwari system in North India, while different in detail, all resulted in high taxation that left peasants with barely enough to survive. Famines became increasingly frequent and deadly under British rule. The government's free market ideology prevented effective intervention. During the 1870s famine in South India, which killed 5.5 million people, the government continued to export grain. Lord Lytton, the Viceroy, declared that there is to be no interference of any kind on the part of government with the object of reducing the price of food. The rise of nationalism. The late 19th century witnessed the birth of Indian nationalism. The Indian National Congress, founded in 1885 by British civil servant Alan Octavian Hume, initially sought only greater Indian participation in government. Early leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and Surendranath Banerjee believed in constitutional methods and loyalty to the British Crown. Naoroji's drain theory provided an economic critique of colonialism. He calculated that Britain extracted £40 million annually from India through various means: salaries of British officials, interest on loans, profits of British companies, and purchase of British goods. This drain, he argued, was the cause of India's poverty. However, a more radical stream emerged under leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Bipin Chandra Pal, and Lala Lajpat Rai, known as the Lal Bal Pal trio. Tilak declared, "Swaraj is my birthright, and I shall have it." They popularized Hindu festivals like Ganesh Chaturthi and Shivaji Jayanti to create national consciousness. The 1905 partition of Bengal catalyzed the nationalist movement. Lord Curzon divided Bengal along religious lines, separating the Muslim-majority eastern districts from the Hindu-majority west. Indians saw this as a deliberate attempt to divide and weaken them. The anti-partition movement launched the Swadeshi campaign, boycotting British goods and promoting Indian industries. The revolutionary movement also gained momentum. In Bengal, groups like Anushilan Samiti and Jugantar planned terrorist attacks against British officials. Khudiram Bose, barely 18 years old, was hanged for throwing a bomb at a British magistrate. In Maharashtra, the Chapekar brothers assassinated British officials to avenge the plague measures in Pune. The most spectacular act was the assassination of Sir Curzon Wyllie in London by Madan Lal Dhingra in 1909. At his trial, Dhingra declared, "I believe that a nation held down by foreign bayonets is in a perpetual state of war. Since open battle is rendered impossible to a disarmed race, I attacked by surprise." World War I and its aftermath. World War I marked a turning point in Indo-British relations. The British promised eventual self-government in return for Indian support. India's contribution was massive. Over 1 million soldiers served overseas, mostly in the Middle East and Europe. The government spent £127 million on the war effort, financed by increased taxation and loans. Indian soldiers fought with distinction at Ypres, Gallipoli, and Mesopotamia. They suffered heavy casualties. 64,400 died, and 69,000 were wounded. Many won gallantry awards, but their sacrifice was rarely acknowledged in Britain. The war ended in November 1918, but instead of the promised reforms, the government passed the Rowlatt Acts in 1919. These laws allowed imprisonment without trial and trials without juries for political offences. Gandhi called for a nationwide satyagraha, non-violent resistance, against these black acts. The protest culminated in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre on April 13, 1919. General Reginald Dyer ordered his troops to fire on an unarmed crowd gathered in a walled garden in Amritsar. The soldiers fired for 10 minutes, killing at least 379 people and wounding over 1,000. Dyer later said he wanted to create a moral effect and teach Indians a lesson. The massacre shocked Indian opinion. Rabindranath Tagore renounced his knighthood, writing to the Viceroy, "The time has come when badges of honor make our shame glaring in their incongruous context of humiliation." Even moderate leaders like Motilal Nehru abandoned cooperation with the government. Gandhi's revolution. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi returned from South Africa in 1915 as a relatively unknown lawyer. His experiments with satyagraha, truth force, or non-violent resistance in South Africa had attracted some attention. But few could have predicted he would transform the Indian freedom struggle. Gandhi's genius lay in connecting the freedom struggle with the daily lives of ordinary Indians. The 1920 non-cooperation movement called for boycotting British institutions, schools, courts, legislatures, and promoting Indian alternatives. Thousands of students left government schools, lawyers abandoned courts, and politicians resigned from councils. The movement created unprecedented unity between Hindus and Muslims. Gandhi supported the Khilafat movement, which demanded restoration of the Turkish caliph's authority over Islamic holy places. Hindu-Muslim cooperation reached its peak during this period, with leaders like Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan working closely with the Congress. However, the movement was suspended in 1922 after protesters burned policemen alive at Chowri Chowra. Gandhi believed that violence, even by his followers, violated the principles of satyagraha. He was arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison, though released after serving 2 years due to illness. The 1920s saw the emergence of a younger generation of leaders. Jawaharlal Nehru, Motilal's son, was influenced by socialist ideas and European nationalism. Subhas Chandra Bose advocated complete independence and was willing to use violence if necessary. These leaders pushed the Congress toward more radical positions. The Simon Commission, appointed in 1927 to review constitutional reforms, had no Indian members. It was boycotted across India with the slogan, "Simon, go back." During a protest in Lahore, police severely beat Lala Lajpat Rai, who died from his injuries. Bhagat Singh, Rajguru and Sukhdev assassinated the police officer responsible and were hanged in 1931, becoming martyrs for the independence movement. The Salt March and civil disobedience. Gandhi's most brilliant political stroke was the 1930 Salt March. On March 12th, he set out from his Sabarmati ashram with 78 followers to walk 241 miles to the coastal village of Dandi. The march took 24 days, during which Gandhi addressed crowds of thousands at every stop. The salt tax was a perfect symbol of colonial exploitation, a necessity of life made expensive by government monopoly. When Gandhi picked up a handful of salt on the beach at Dandi on April 6th, he violated the law and launched nationwide civil disobedience. The response was extraordinary. Across India, people made salt, picketed liquor shops, boycotted foreign cloth, and courted arrest. Women participated in large numbers for the first time. Sarojini Naidu led a raid on the Darasana salt works, where police brutally beat nonviolent protesters. American journalist Webb Miller's account of the beatings shocked world opinion. Over 100,000 people were arrested, including Gandhi and most Congress leaders. The movement continued for a year before Gandhi signed the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, agreeing to suspend civil disobedience in return for the release of political prisoners and permission to make salt for domestic use. World War II and quit India. The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 created a new crisis. The Viceroy declared India at war without consulting Indian leaders. The Congress governments in 8 provinces resigned in protest, while the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, declared a day of deliverance from Congress rule. Gandhi and the Congress initially opposed fascism, but refused to support the war unless Britain granted immediate independence. Churchill, who became Prime Minister in 1940, rejected any such concessions. His attitude toward Indians was summed up in his infamous statement, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion." The Japanese advance through Southeast Asia brought the war to India's doorstep. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 shocked the British, who had considered it impregnable. Japanese forces reached the borders of India, and air raids hit Calcutta and other eastern cities. In this crisis, Sir Stafford Cripps arrived in Delhi with proposals for post-war dominion status. Gandhi dismissed the offer as a post-dated check on a failing bank. The Congress demand remained immediate independence, though they were willing to cooperate in defense if their demands were met. The failure of the Cripps mission led to the Quit India movement. launched on August 9, 1942. Gandhi's call to do or die sparked the largest mass movement in Indian history. Within hours, all major Congress leaders were arrested and taken to undisclosed locations. Leaderless, the movement took on a violent character. Railway lines were cut, telegraph wires destroyed, and government buildings attacked. In some areas, parallel governments were established. The government's response was brutal. Machine guns were used against crowds. Villages were bombed from aircraft, and collective fines imposed on entire districts. Over 1,000 people were killed, and 60,000 arrested during the movement. The government managed to suppress the revolt, but British prestige was severely damaged. It became clear that Britain could not continue to rule India without massive coercion. Partition and independence. Meanwhile, the Muslim League under Jinnah was gaining strength. The 1946 elections saw the League win almost all Muslim seats on the platform of Pakistan, a separate homeland for Muslims. Jinnah argued that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations that could not coexist in a single state. The Congress, led by Nehru, rejected the two-nation theory, but was unwilling to share power with the League in a loose federation. Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946, called by the League, led to horrific communal riots in Calcutta. Thousands died in what became known as the Great Calcutta Killing. The riots spread to other parts of India. In Bihar, Hindus massacred Muslims in retaliation for Calcutta. In Noakhali district of Bengal, Muslims attacked Hindu minorities. Gandhi went to Noakhali and walked from village to village, trying to restore peace through personal example. The new Labour government in Britain, economically exhausted by the war, decided to transfer power quickly. Lord Mountbatten, the last viceroy, arrived in March 1947 with instructions to ensure transfer of power by June 1948. However, the deteriorating communal situation forced him to advance the date to August 15, 1947. Partition became inevitable as violence spread. Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who had never been to India before, was given 5 weeks to draw the boundaries between India and Pakistan. His awards were announced only after independence, leading to chaos and massive displacement. The tragedy of partition. August 15, 1947, was a day of both joy and sorrow. India achieved independence, but at the cost of partition. Two dominions, India and Pakistan, were created, with Pakistan consisting of two wings, separated by over 1,000 miles of Indian territory. Nehru's famous Tryst with Destiny speech captured the moment. Long years ago we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. But the celebrations were overshadowed by unprecedented human tragedy. The partition led to one of the largest migrations in human history. An estimated 10 to 12 million people crossed the borders, Hindus and Sikhs moving from Pakistan to India, Muslims moving in the opposite direction. The migration was accompanied by horrific violence. Trains carrying refugees arrived at stations filled with corpses. Entire families were wiped out. Women were raped, abducted, and killed. Some estimates put the death toll at between 500,000 to 1 million people. The violence was worst in Punjab, which was divided between India and Pakistan. Sikh and Hindu communities that had lived there for centuries were forced to flee. leaving behind ancestral homes and property. Similarly, Muslim families that had lived in India for generations had to migrate to Pakistan. Gandhi, the apostle of non-violence, was heartbroken by the partition violence. He undertook several fasts to restore peace and spent his final months trying to heal communal wounds. On January 30th, 1948, he was assassinated by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu extremist who blamed Gandhi for being too sympathetic to Muslims. Building the new nation. Independent India faced enormous challenges. The country was divided not just by partition, but also by princely states that had to be integrated. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, known as the Iron Man of India, accomplished the monumental task of integrating over 550 princely states into the Indian Union. The most dramatic integration was that of Hyderabad, the largest princely state, whose Nizam wanted to remain independent. When negotiations failed, Indian forces launched Operation Polo in September 1948, incorporating Hyderabad into India within 5 days. Kashmir presented a more complex problem. The Maharaja, Hari Singh, initially wanted independence, but acceded to India when tribal raiders from Pakistan invaded in October 1947. This led to the First Indo-Pakistani War, which ended with a ceasefire line dividing Kashmir between the two countries. The Kashmir dispute remains unresolved to this day. The Constitution of India, adopted on January 26, 1950, was one of the most progressive documents of its time. Drafted by a committee headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, it guaranteed fundamental rights, established parliamentary democracy, and included directive principles for social and economic justice. Ambedkar, born into the lowest caste, had faced severe discrimination throughout his life. His inclusion, as chairman of the drafting committee, symbolized the new India's commitment to equality. The Constitution abolished untouchability and provided for reservations in education and employment for disadvantaged communities. Nehru's vision and economic development. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, served for 17 years until his death in 1964. His vision of a modern, secular, socialist India shaped the country's early development. Nehru believed in scientific temper, industrialization, and non-alignment in foreign policy. The 5-year plans, modeled on Soviet planning, aimed to achieve rapid industrialization. Heavy industries like steel, coal, and chemicals were developed in the public sector. The Bhilai, Durgapur, and Rourkela steel plants, built with Soviet, British, and German collaboration respectively, became symbols of modern India. Education received high priority. The Indian Institutes of Technology, established with international assistance, produced world-class engineers and scientists. The Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore and the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bombay became centers of scientific research. Nehru's non-aligned foreign policy sought to avoid entanglement in Cold War blocs. Along with Egypt's Nasser and Yugoslavia's Tito, he founded the non-aligned movement, which became a powerful voice for developing countries. India played a leading role in the decolonization process, supporting liberation movements in Africa and Asia. However, Nehru's idealism faced severe tests. The 1962 war with China was a crushing defeat that shattered India's confidence. Chinese forces advanced deep into Indian territory before declaring a unilateral ceasefire. The defeat led to Nehru's decline and death 2 years later. The Indira era. Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, became Prime Minister in 1966 after Lal Bahadur Shastri's sudden death. Initially considered weak and controlled by party bosses, she soon proved to be a formidable leader who dominated Indian politics for 2 decades. The 1971 war with Pakistan was Indira's finest hour. When East Pakistan rebelled against West Pakistani domination, millions of refugees fled to India. Despite pressure from the United States and China, Indira decided to intervene militarily. The war ended in victory, with East Pakistan becoming independent Bangladesh. The 1970s also saw the Green Revolution, which transformed Indian agriculture. High-yielding varieties of wheat and rice, along with increased use of fertilizers and pesticides, dramatically increased food production. India became self-sufficient in food grains for the first time since independence. However, Indira's authoritarian tendencies became apparent during the emergency period from 1975 to 1977. Facing a court order that would have removed her from office, she declared a national emergency, suspended civil liberties, and arrested opposition leaders. The media was censored, and forced sterilizations were carried out in the name of population control. The emergency was deeply unpopular, and when elections were held in 1977, Indira was decisively defeated. The Janata Party, a coalition of opposition groups, came to power under Morarji Desai. However, internal squabbling led to the government's collapse, and Indira returned to power in 1980. Economic liberalization and rise. The 1980s saw gradual economic liberalization under Rajiv Gandhi, who became Prime Minister after his mother's assassination in 1984. Rajiv, a former airline pilot with no political experience, brought a modern outlook to governance. He promoted computer technology and telecommunications, laying the foundation for India's later IT boom. However, it was the 1991 economic crisis that forced radical reforms. The collapse of the Soviet Union, India's major trading partner, combined with the Gulf War, created a severe balance of payments crisis. India had to airlift gold reserves to London as collateral for emergency loans. Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh launched comprehensive economic reforms. The License Raj, a complex system of permits and quotas, was dismantled. Foreign investment was welcomed, tariffs were reduced, and many public sector monopolies were ended. The reforms unleashed India's entrepreneurial energy. Information technology became a major export industry, with companies like Infosys, Wipro, and TCS becoming global players. The Indian software industry grew from virtually nothing to over $100 billion in annual revenue. The digital revolution and modern India. The 21st century has seen India's emergence as a major global power. The economy has grown at 7 to 9% annually for 2 decades, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. India is now the world's 4th largest economy and is projected to become the 3rd largest by 2030. The digital revolution has been particularly transformative. India has the world's largest number of internet users after China. The Aadhaar system, providing unique digital identities to over 1 billion people, is the world's largest biometric database. The Unified Payments Interface processes billions of transactions monthly, making India a leader in digital payments. Space technology has become a source of national pride. The Mars Orbiter mission, launched in 2013 for just $74 million, demonstrated India's frugal engineering capabilities. The Chandrayaan missions have explored the moon, and in 2023, Chandrayaan-3 successfully landed in the lunar South Polar region, making India the 4th country to achieve a soft lunar landing. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who came to power in 2014, India has pursued an assertive foreign policy. The Act East policy has strengthened ties with Southeast Asia and East Asia. India has joined the Quad alliance with the United States, Japan, and Australia to counter China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. The COVID-19 pandemic posed severe challenges, but India's response demonstrated its capabilities. The country became the pharmacy of the world, supplying vaccines and medicines globally. The vaccination drive, covering over 1 billion people, was one of the world's largest public health campaigns. Contemporary challenges and future prospects. Despite remarkable progress, India faces significant challenges. Income inequality has increased, with the benefits of growth not reaching all sections of society. Environmental degradation, particularly air pollution in major cities, poses serious health risks. Climate change threatens agriculture and water resources. Communal tensions remain a concern. The rise of Hindu nationalism has led to increased polarization, with minorities feeling marginalized. The Kashmir situation remains unresolved, and relations with Pakistan continue to be tense, with both countries now nuclear powers. However, India's democratic institutions have shown resilience. The Supreme Court has acted as a check on executive power. The Election Commission has conducted free and fair elections, and civil society remains vibrant. The free press, despite some restrictions, continues to hold power accountable. India's demographic dividend, a young population with a median age of 28, provides enormous potential. If properly educated and skilled, this workforce can drive decades of economic growth. The Digital India initiative aims to provide high-speed internet to all villages, potentially unleashing innovation and entrepreneurship in rural areas. The startup ecosystem has flourished, with India becoming the third-largest startup hub globally. Companies like Flipkart, Paytm, and Ola have achieved billion-dollar valuations. The government's Make in India initiative aims to transform the country into a global manufacturing hub. India's soft power, Bollywood, yoga, cuisine, and spirituality, has global appeal. The ancient practice of yoga is now practiced by millions worldwide. Indian cuisine has become popular globally, and Bollywood films have audiences from Nigeria to Russia. As India approaches the 78th anniversary of its independence, it stands at a crucial juncture. The country that was once dismissed as a ship-to-mouth economy has become the world's fastest-growing major economy. The civilization that gave the world the concept of zero in mathematics is now leading in information technology. From the ancient Harappan cities with their sophisticated urban planning to modern Bangalore with its software parks, from the spiritual teachings of the Buddha to the scientific achievements of contemporary India, this remarkable journey spans over 4 millennia. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and ultimately, triumph over adversity. Today's India, with its billion-plus population, thriving democracy, growing economy, and ancient wisdom adapted to modern needs, represents one of humanity's great success stories. The challenges are real and significant, but so is the determination to overcome them. As this ancient civilization continues its journey into the 21st century, its best days may well lie ahead.